Tell my father I died with my face to the enemy. Those were the last words written by a dying soldier here at Gettysburg. Hello and welcome back to my channel, Civil War Reports. I am your War of the Rebellion reporter, Brian Thomas Kopak. And today we're going to take a look at the life and tragic death of Colonel Avery, who was in command of Hoke's Brigade here at the Battle of Gettysburg. And it would be here that Colonel Avery's life would come to an end. He was born on December 20th, 1828, at Swan Ponds in Burke County, North Carolina. He was the fourth child of what would be a family of 16 children, 10 of whom would survive to adulthood. As a young man, Isaac would study at the University of North Carolina, but only for 1 year before he left school, and his father would put him in charge of one of the family plantations in Yancey County, a little further west than his native Burke. He came from a wealthy landowning family, and before the war he would be involved in not only managing a plantation, but he'd also, shall we say, dibbled in politics and in law and in education and in railroading. And it would be in this last aspect of railroading that he would be involved before the war broke out. In 1854, the Western North Carolina Railroad was chartered, and Isaac Avery served as a high-ranking member on that railroad's board, and the plan was to run a railroad from Salisbury, North Carolina to Morganton, North Carolina, with it eventually ending at Ashbury, North Carolina. However, when South Carolina seceded on December 20th, 1860, Avery's 32nd birthday, it wasn't long before, well, North Carolina would eventually secede. And the railroad that he was working on was almost complete, at least with the first leg. The railroad had, enough track had been laid to get to within 3 miles of Morganton. So when the Civil War finally caught up with North Carolina seceded from the Union, Isaac Avery was quick to offer his services to his state's cause. He raised a company, which would be Company E, for the 6th North Carolina Infantry Regiment. And because of his popularity and well-known status, Company E was the largest of the companies in the 6th North Carolina when it was mustered into service. Now, Avery was described as being a very physically big man. He stood over 6 feet tall and over 200 pounds, which was very tall by contemporary standards of that day. Also, he was really described as having a very nice personality. The men felt that they could easily talk to him, and that they felt that he was somebody there that was willing to listen and help the men out as best he could. The 6th North Carolina's first colonel, Colonel Charles Fisher, had a unique belt buckle created specifically for the 6th North Carolina. It does state that it's the 6th North Carolina. If you ever should come across one of these things at an antique shop, my suggestion would be to, as long as you know it's authentic, pick one up. It'd be a great collection for any Civil War history buff. The 6th North Carolina was at the Battle of First Manassas. Unfortunately for Colonel Fisher, it would be his last. He was shot in the head and killed almost instantly. As for Avery, he was promoted to lieutenant colonel of the 6th North Carolina shortly after the Battle of Seven Pines, and not too much later after that, he was promoted to the rank of colonel. At the Battle of Gaines Farm, Avery would be wounded, but he wouldn't be out of action for too long. At the Battle of Chancellorsville, Avery was in command of the 6th North Carolina, again part of Hoke's brigade. Hoke would be badly wounded at Chancellorsville, and Avery would step up and lead the brigade for the duration of that battle. Hoke would not recover in time to take part in the Gettysburg campaign, and thus Avery would lead Hoke's brigade into battle here at Gettysburg. Hoke's brigade at Gettysburg consisted of the 6th, the 21st, and the 57th North Carolina. Also assigned to Hoke's brigade, but not here at Gettysburg, was the 54th North Carolina. They remained in Winchester, Virginia, to guard prisoners and to protect Lee's lines of communication. So the 54th North Carolina was not here at Gettysburg. So Avery would be leading a brigade 3 regiments strong on July 1st and July 2nd, 1863. I'm now standing on Barlow's Knoll, and it was in this area here that General Jubal Early's division would attack. Now, Avery's brigade was not the brigade that would attack here. This honor would fall to General Gordon. So while Colonel Avery's men did not attack here at Barlow's Knoll, they were part of the 3-brigade wide front that Jubal Early deployed here on the first day of Gettysburg. As I mentioned, General Gordon's men would be on Early's extreme right, and they would attack Barlow's Knoll. By the way, at the time of the start of the battle, it was known as Blocker's Knoll, but because General Barlow was badly wounded here, it now forever bears his name. So, next to Gordon was Hayes's brigade, and on the extreme left of Early's 3-brigade-wide attack was Colonel Avery. You could probably see in the background Harrisburg Road. Avery's men deployed between the Harrisburg Road and the York Road. William Extra Billy Smith's brigade was held in reserve during the attack on July 1st, so they did not see as much action as the other 3 brigades that fronted Early's attack. Hayes and Hoke's brigade were on the center and the extreme left of Jubal Early's division, and they were the first of Early's men to enter the town. And the extreme right of the Union line was the 134th New York, which is part of Custer's brigade. Avery's line overlapped the Union Army, thus forcing a retreat through the town, and many Union soldiers were captured, particularly by Hayes and Hoke's brigade, for Early's division that day on July 1st. I'm crouched down above Winebrenner Run, and off in the distance is Culp's Hill. And it was here on July 2nd, 1863, that the men of both Hayes and Avery's brigades had to wait in the blistering hot sun for orders to attack. I'm not too far from East Cemetery Hill, and Culp's Hill is off to my left, and the men really could do nothing here but wait. To get up and try to redeploy, move somewhere safer, would be exposing themselves to unnecessary Union artillery and musket fire. So please allow me to point out some landmarks. Off here in the distance, you may be able to see the top of the observation tower, which is currently on Culp's Hill. And off in the distance there is the equestrian statue for Union General Slocum, and that is on Stevens Knoll. Straight ahead is East Cemetery Hill. This is the area that General Hayes and Colonel Avery's men would be attacking on the night of July 2nd. So when the order finally came for Avery's men to attack, it was late in the afternoon, early evening of July 2nd, and the firing and fighting had really started to peter out. The order came, and the way it was laid out, only 2 brigades of Jubal Early's division led the attack in this area. General Hayes was on the right, Avery on the left. Now for Avery, they had a bit of a longer march, and they would have to execute a right wheel and thus begin their attack towards Cemetery Hill. Now, when this happened and they were marching across this field, they were exposed to enfilade cannon fire from Stevens' 6 12-pound Napoleons, and he really let into them with canister and double canister, and as well as Ricketts Battery up on Cemetery Hill was firing into them with case shot. On July 1st, Colonel Avery led his brigade into battle on horseback, and he would repeat that on July 2nd. Now, he originally mounted, but then I guess maybe he looked over to the terrain and decided, well, maybe this is not a good spot to go in mounted, because he was going to be charging uphill. He would be very conspicuous, a very good, easy target. So he decided not to go in on horseback. However, he then changed his mind again and remounted. So that proved to be a fatal decision. Where he was actually shot is up to a lot of debate. We know this much. He was shot in the neck, and he was bleeding profusely. As he lay dying, he took out a piece of paper and a pencil that he had on him, and he scratched those words I mentioned at the start of the episode. "Tell my father I died with my face to the enemy." His last thoughts were about home and family. I'm standing alongside the monument for the 33rd Massachusetts. That was pretty much the end of the Union's infantry before getting to Stevens Knoll, which is directly in front of me. This would have been the area that Avery's men would have been hitting. Also, next to and down the road here are more and more Union monuments representing different regiments of the 11th Corps. That's who Avery's men were hitting. So exactly where did Colonel Avery fall? Well, unfortunately, that information seems to have been lost to history. Looking at one of the footnotes here in Harry Fans's book, Gettysburg, Culp's Hill, Cemetery Hill, the author seems to be in conflict with a member of Avery's staff who tried to point out the exact spot where Colonel Avery fell. So let's take a look at this footnote here. It states, on June 20th, 1896, John A. McPherson, formerly of Avery's staff, marked the site of Avery's fall in the area now occupied by the high school stadium. That is the football field behind me. I, meaning fans, and others believe that site mark is too far to the right and would have been in the zone of Hayes' brigade rather than Hoke's. So we really don't know for sure where Avery fell, but what we do know is this. His body was recovered. He had his own personal body servant, and his name was a gentleman by the name of Elijah. And Elijah, I think, is one of the unsung heroes of the Civil War, because with the death of his master, well, that's where the story could have ended. But Elijah wanted to take Colonel Avery's body back to his family, wanted to take him back home to North Carolina. And I'm going to do many episodes, I'm sure, on Lee's retreat from Gettysburg. When it came time for Lee to leave the Gettysburg area, vehicles, wagons, carriages were in short supply. They were stealing from the countryside here because he had so many wounded that he wanted to get back to Virginia. Elijah secured a vehicle, put Colonel Avery's body on it with the intention of taking him home, taking him back to his family for proper burial. Unfortunately, due to the heavy rains of the retreat and the bottleneck that was occurring in Maryland as Lee was trying to get back across the Potomac to the safety of Virginia, unfortunately, Elijah was not able to complete his mission, and Colonel Avery is buried in Hagerstown, Maryland. And here are the main sources I used to bring this episode to you. Until next time, please keep the history alive.